Iano pater, te hoc ture omovendo, bonas preces precor, odisies volens propitios mihi liberisque, meis domo familiaeque meae. Iano pater, uti te ture omovendo, bonas preces bene precatus sum, eustem re ergo macte vino inferio esto.
Father of our hearth, protect us and give us strength. Keeper of the fires, noble hero of our house. Through your virtue, we are given a blessed path. Mother of our earth, nurture us and give us breath. Keeper of the life, great loving matriarch of our line. Through your virtue, our essence is given form.
Who were our ancestors? Modern man seems preoccupied with where our genetics can place us on a map, but our most important connection to our ancestors is not the naturalistic cult of the blood, but rather as the spiritual fulcrum of an entire family lineage. The forefathers are, of course, genetic antecedents, but the bond to them is an otherworldly one, as if they shared one unified purpose as it pertains to the divine mission of the soul. The patriciate is the aristocratic segment of a people blessed with special attributes endowed from above due to their divine connection through the sacred rites. This endowment is a transcendent one, a concentration of supernatural forces bestowed by a lineage of blood, but far more than just a genetic connection or a merely biological inheritance. It was a particular spiritual energy, the mystical force of a people, living in and perpetuated through that lineage. When a sacred king has many children, not all of them are destined for the throne. A great many generations later, there would be a population of thousands of people who could claim direct descent from that regal line. In traditional societies, it is this noble segment that forms the patriciate and is possessed with primordial powers connected to and expressed in the rite. In modern times, we think of the aristocracy as a financial elite or perhaps an intellectual elite, but in ancient times, it was the power of the right which the aristocracy alone wielded that conferred special status upon them, and not great wealth or political influence. The protection of the mystery, the transfer of it to the next generation, and the maintenance of the fire of that house was essential to seizing the victory of the ancestors, as each living generation was viewed as part of a sacred trust, the fulfillment of which opens doors to the heavens and completes the story of that family. Evola says, the supernatural element was the foundation of the idea of a traditional patriciate and of legitimate royalty. What constituted an ancient aristocrat was not merely a biological legacy or racial selection, but rather a sacred tradition. This is what it means to have ancestors in a spiritual sense. In the biological sense, everyone has ancestors, but so too can animals be said to have them. Gentem non habent was a Latin expression to describe the plebeians, literally meaning the have-nots, that is, those with no rights nor ancestors. To the Romans, having ancestors meant having a divine lineage and thus sacred rights exclusive to your family, through which the family was bound together spiritually, which superseded their merely genetic bond. What distinguished the patriciate classes from the plebeians was a transcendent connection to those who came before, as well as a sacred duty to those who would come after. Over centuries, the patrician family managed to keep alive the legacy of their divine ancestor. Just as the sacred king was descended from a god, so too were the patrician families. Where the nation would practice devotion to the god of the sacred king as the patron of their society, each patrician family also maintained its own domestic cult and set of rites devoted to the particular god that was the progenitor of their family line, as well as the tutelary gods of their household. The family is the distilled version of the nation. Ancestor worship today is considered to be nothing more than a primitive, superstitious religion, the worship of ghosts. And in many cases, that is what the domestic cult degenerated into over time, once the rites were neglected and the bloodlines diluted. When the ritual is lost, these cults take on the chthonic and earthly character of plebeian religions. The lower classes had customs and beliefs, but no transcendent quality or form entrusted to a rigorous and secret ritual tradition was transmitted to them through the blood. As such, the plebeians did not have the privilege of the second birth, of initiation, which characterized the nobility. Further, they lacked the solar element that would give their religions a quality of upward transcendence. Instead, they had a collective and chthonic character. They were considered children of the earth, and their religions were often characterized by subterranean forces and devotion to the feminine, which celebrated their promiscuity and connection to the naturalistic and generative forces, rather than to the solar luminous forms of the heroic tradition. There is a modern and egalitarian notion that one's lineage is unimportant, that whether or not one comes from a good family is irrelevant, and that it is only the merits of the individual that matter. This attitude is perhaps due in part to the fact that people are now conditioned to dislike aristocracy and natural elitism as a result of its modern corruption. However, the modern celebration of the common man and the accompanying belief that everyone is just as good as everyone else is antithetical to tradition, which upholds a clear hierarchy that is designed to reflect the divine order amidst the chaos of the world. The establishment of the patriciate is part of the establishment of order against chaos, a critical element in holding back the forces of Gog and Magog. The patrician class represented and upheld divine order and assisted in its flow through wider society, including those of the lower classes for whose well-being they were responsible, as it was the duty of the higher castes to uplift the lower and give them a chance at experiencing divine connection too. The plebeian classes represent chaos, and their natural tendency is to live in a chaotic way. Everything about their function and role is of the earth. They are lunar and naturalistic. Their breeding choices are simplistic and promiscuous. In the event of social strife, they are easily riled up into a mob. They lack any higher impulse and are content to function on a very basic level, living with a focus on material senses, lacking self-mastery and direction, and happy to overindulge whenever possible. They don't aspire to anything more because they do not come from a legacy of aspiring to more. It is not in their collective unconscious to long for something more than life, and they gravitate instead to satisfying their sensory pleasures. Such people are not a bulwark against chaos, but more often than not are unwitting servants of it. Aldous Huxley spoke of 3 types of transcendence. One is the upward transcendence that we see among the initiated, those who go beyond by rising, to take the term literally, beyond themselves, that is, those who have changed their ontological nature and who participate in the sacred rites. But Huxley also refers to 2 other types of transcendence, and these are the purview of the lower classes for whom upward transcendence is not open. There is the downward transcendence of drugs and other substances, sexuality, and what Huxley calls crowd delirium, or what we might today call mob mentality. There is also a horizontal or lateral transcendence, which Evola says in his book, The Bow in the Club, manifests itself in collectivist phenomena, in the passive and irrational identification of the individual with various fanatical currents or movements or ideologies, with the manias of the day. The plebeian religions, therefore, could still offer a type of transcendence, but it was not of the upward nature of the Olympian solar type, where one acquires a legitimate dignity and power through the participation in a higher order of rites. Instead, the plebeian religions tend towards the sense pleasures of downward transcendence, for example, in the form of the Dionysian bacchanalias of the ancient world, or the more modern forms of New Age shamanism and psychedelic mysticism, or the collectivist transcendence as seen in the modern-day atheistic religions of mass hysteria and social outrage. In some ways, the plebeian grasping at transcendence could be characterized as Promethean, an illegitimate attempt to acquire a supernatural dignity and power that has not been hard-won through initiation, but is stolen or even fraudulent. Spiritual paths that are upwardly oriented all have rules about how one should use their lower energies, with the goal of transmuting them into something higher, not just indulging in the sense pleasures of the material world. The downward and horizontal paths keep one trapped in materiality, but offer the illusion that it is something more, as it takes one out, however briefly, of the mundane aspects of their lives. The upward path of the patriciate granted them a spiritual virility. The dignity enjoyed by the aristocracy was not the meritocracy of one's individual talents, but rather a spiritual meritocracy based both on their family lineage, but also on the ontological nature that was bestowed on them by virtue of being born into such a family and participating in initiatic and ritual traditions. In our modern egalitarian society, many people would bristle at the idea that anyone is born better than someone else, but such notions would have been commonplace assumptions in the traditional world. Evola notes that even among primitive peoples, men who had not been initiated were looked down upon and considered no better than women, children, or even animals, and were excluded from political and military privileges. A man was not considered a true man unless he had undergone the harsh trials of the rites that were designed to transform his inner nature. Once he was twice born, a man could join the group of true men who oversaw the affairs of the community. Initiation was seen to confer true manhood, and it was a man's spiritual virility that set him above others, not his intellect or his physical strength. Evola notes briefly the difference between the Latin words vir and homo, both translated to mean man, but with markedly different meanings. Homo designates a man that is earthly, possibly fashioned from the earth itself, and not immortal. Vir, on the other hand, has its origins in words meaning strength, power, and vitality. There is a heroic aspect to it. Giambattista Vico says in his famous tome The New Science that this term implies a special dignity, designating a man of the nobility, and he remarks, the term vir indicated wisdom, priesthood, and kingship, as I have previously demonstrated that it formed one thing in the person of the first fathers in the state constituted by families. Vir is also the obvious root word of virtue and virility, two things the aristocracy was originally based upon. Evola says that it is only in recent times that the aristocracy has taken on a secular and political character. He criticizes the modern bourgeois aristocracy of intellectuals, and he gives the example of an ancient German noble family who once replied to a census, Analphabet wegen des hohen Adels, meaning they are illiterate because they are of high nobility. When one is well versed in the law from above, where their knowledge is coming through direct contact with the divine, there is no need to get knowledge from books. In fact, it was considered degenerate to need to read and write, as there was an emphasis instead on the art of memory. It is said in the Vedic literature that as humanity degenerates, we will lose our ability to remember, and it is because this happens that we have a need for written information. This is the reason for the oral traditions of many ancient spiritual cultures, not because they were simpletons or lacked foresight, as modern academics sometimes imply. There is, unfortunately, much that we have now forgotten. The spiritual virility of a man, which may have qualified him to be a king, a priest, or other nobility, also conferred on him an authority over his own household. The pater not only had spiritual authority, but also a power and majestic dignity. While the sacred king was the lord of justice to the entire empire, the paterfamilias was the lord of justice to his family. In a rare instance of inserting his own opinion into the text, Evola says, according to some views with which I totally concur, the state is an application on a larger scale of the same principle that in the beginning constituted the patrician family. The traditional view of the paterfamilias is often misunderstood and mischaracterized by those with modern biases and prejudices that have been colored by a world ruled by the feminine principle, but it is unsurprising that a largely atheistic worldview would fail to grasp the significance of the spiritual aspect of a society oriented around a patriarchy. Evola writes, The father was the virile priest in charge of tending to the sacred family fire, but he was also the one who must have appeared like a hero to his children, relatives, and servants, or like the natural mediator of every efficacious relationship with the supernatural, or like the supreme vivifier of the mystical force of the ritual, which was present in the substance of fire, or like the incarnation of order, as Agni was to the Indo-Aryans, or like the principle that brings the gods to us, or like the firstborn from order, or like the son of strength, or like he who leads us away from this world to higher dimensions, into the world of right action. The role of the family patriarch was that of a bridge between his family and the family's tutelary gods. He must perform the rites to reinvigorate the gods who are the progenitors of the family, and to harness the supernatural powers for the benefit of both the living and the dead. The paterfamilias in ancient Rome was also believed to embody the genius, that is, the generative principle and guardian spirit of his ancestors, and in general the innate male power of one's clan. The genius was, interestingly, represented by the snake, which was a nearly universal symbol among ancient cultures of both immortality and wisdom, the tempter of man to divine knowledge and understanding. In the traditional family, their bond was not one of affection, but one of religion, to which natural affection was subordinate, and this condition characterized the patriarchal family wherever ancestor worship existed. The shared ritual that was unique to a particular family constituted the basis of the bond. The paterfamilias held the rights in trust for his family, the caretaker of them for a generation. While modern scholars often malign the patria potestas as a cruel despotism that was wielded to put family members to death or to sell children into slavery, in reality, while his legal rights may have had a formidable character, the paterfamilias was expected to rule his family guided by divine wisdom and justice, in service to the greater good of the family, and would not likely be used against the communal judgment of his family or wider society. For example, an errant son might be put to death if he had committed some crime that jeopardized the continuation of the family cult through bringing ruin upon the family, particularly in societies where the whole family could be held accountable for the crimes of a relative, as in ancient Japan, where the entire family might be put to death for a capital offense. The paterfamilias was the representative of his family, and if he erred in his judgment, the whole family could be liable to suffer the consequences of his mistake. He exercised his authority in the name of the family as a whole, guided by his knowledge from above and his superior ontological nature, for the long-term benefit of the family, not as a tyrannical imposition of his own will and personal agenda. The role of the paterfamilias would be inherited by the firstborn son, and in the Vedic tradition, the firstborn son frees his father from the debt to the ancestors, taking his father's place on the earthly plane and continuing to bear forth the spiritual fire of the blood of the ancestors. His spiritual mission is directly tied to the cult of his family, and he must keep the family's spiritual quest alive. It was considered the greatest calamity to die without leaving a male heir to perform the rites and make the offerings. As the creative force is part of the masculine principle, the duty of maintaining the rites rested with the man, not the woman. It was therefore of paramount duty to the family to ensure an heir. For a younger son to die without an heir was a personal misfortune for him, but in the case of the firstborn son and successor, it was a crime against the ancestors, as the religious cult of the family was then threatened with extinction. However, because the family bond was primarily a spiritual one, a son could be adopted into the family to carry on the rites, and likewise a biological son who neglected the rights of the family could have his privileges taken away. Thus, right rather than blood was the primary unifier of the family, and this was also the case when it came to marriage among patrician families. In India, Greece, and Rome, before becoming her husband's bride, a woman had to first be mystically joined to his family through the rites. While the lower classes participated in a secular type of marriage, where the woman was seen as merely property to be transferred from father to husband, the patrician classes conducted a ritual and sacred marriage, and Evola notes that the sacral element that abided in the agape was considered to be so important that without it the validity of the marriage could be challenged. Evola also touches on the idea of a spiritual paternity superseding a natural paternity, of a second birth over a natural birth. He quotes from the laws of Manu: "The Brahmana who brings about the Vedic birth of an older person, and who teaches him his own duties becomes his father according to law, even if he himself is a child." That is, one who guides another along the path of Dharma becomes that person's spiritual father, and this is a stronger connection than that of mere biology. The family arose as a consequence of contact with the divine and is an adaptation of that original spiritual lineage. The repeating theme throughout tradition is the order from above. Every traditional institution, from the empire to the family, is, to varying degrees, a microcosm of the macrocosm, a reflection of the innate hierarchy of divine order. These institutions are not based on naturalistic elements from below, but on the sacred legacies and spiritual actions that bend and shape nature to resonate with the divine. However, in the current age of the Kali Yuga, where the family has broken down into little more than loose collections of atomized individuals, the ideal of a family united by something more than blood might seem like only a half-remembered dream. Few of us have families that are equipped to assist us on a spiritual path. How can we regain our divine lineages and relight the triumphal fire of our ancestors? We can reignite the flame within ourselves, the living link in the golden chain that stretches into eternity. It is said in the Srimad Bhagavatam that a person who achieves a spiritual victory purifies his entire dynasty, as if a current of liberating spiritual energy travels down the metaphysical circuits of a family line into a dimension where time and space cease to exist, the biospirit reinvigorating the forefathers in their spiritual journey in the afterlife. We can become a liberating force for our ancestors and stir the gods of our families, giving them a new life, allowing them to live again. We need not allow despair to set in, or to watch the modern world and feel as though life has no meaning. When you are connected to the great spirit of your ancestors, then that life essence animates you and serves as an antidote to nihilism. There are thousands of lifetimes within you, of which you are but a sacred trustee and a bearer of the flame. For whatever shortcomings many of our forefathers may have had, they somehow managed to keep the fire alive through countless dark nights so that we could be here today. By completing the journey and discovering the lost wisdom, by living in step with the integral traditions, you reconnect your soul to the collective unconscious and become who you were born to be. You are the bearer of this divine fire of your forefathers, your family, and your people. Rise to this challenge, all who heed the call, and along with the turning of the seasons will come a new nobility, made strong like steel in the furnace of the Kali Yuga, with hearts full of love and spiritual power, the two elements from which great nations are born, and on which the fate of the world turns.
my hearth, my family, my treasure of soul, my people, my legacy, my honor to know.
We were so proud and strong,
And we could do no wrong as long as we kept the rights alive.
on grasp of destiny,
Woven through eternity, the infinite extends its hand to life. United are we through the circuits of life, the fire of our hearts kept alive. The gods have blessed us, dear Father. Your guidance has brought us the divine. My love, my dignity, my virtuous guide, my hope, my progeny, the imminence of life.
our emblem was invincible,
Our lineage, the true symbol, as long as we kept the rights alive.
a solid dignity,
Uranian in quality, our ancestors